Nightjohn, Chapter 4. Come a hard time then, come an awful hard time. There be a girl before they named Alice. She slept in the other end of the quarters, and as soon as she got big she went to work in the fields, picking and hoeing. She was addled in the brain, or in the head, and dreaming sometimes, and Mammy said one day they would sell her. But her body was all right, and they in the White House decided she'd be a good breeder, so they set her for that. She didn't take well to it, and she fought, and they tied her to make it happen in the breeding shed in the back of the quarters. But it went bad on her head and her thinking, and when it was done, she was worse than before. She wandered in the yard and sometimes even went up to the White House. Except for the house servants and the gardening, we weren't allowed to the White House. And when the master one day caught Alice, he took her to the wall of the spring house. The spring house was where we got drinking water. It was made of stone and with heavy walls. They had rings of iron to be made in the walls many years past. Big rings of iron, with chains and shackles, and they put Alice there, and they tore her clothes off. Then the master whipped her his own self with a rawhide whip cut from an old gin belt used in the cotton gin. Sometimes he doesn't whip, and he makes a field hand do it and stands with his pistol in his belt and smiles. But sometimes he likes to take the whip, and this time he whipped her until her back was all ripped and bleeding. We had to watch. Every time there was somebody to be on the wall of the spring house and to be whipped or other punishments, we all had to watch. When it was done, she had screamed until she sounded like pigs being cut. He made Mammy go to the salt house and get salt and rub it in her cuts and make more pain. I've never heard a sound like that. I'd seen men whipped, but never like that kind of sound, cutting like that, high and higher, until it whistled in my ears. Then he left her to hang there until the next day. The flies came, and Mammy went out and covered her back with a cloth and kept some of them off so they wouldn't make maggots in her cuts. Next morning they took her down, and there were some maggot eggs, but not so bad. I helped Mammy clean Alice. We took her in the quarters, and she rubbed some grease on Alice's back, and I sat and held her hands because she kept trying to reach around and push Mammy's hand away. All the time she don't say anything, not a thing, not even silly things she used to say. When we were done, she lay on the floor in the corner like she was broken inside. Mammy made her some root tea that smelled of bark, but Alice wouldn't drink it. She just lay there all that night and the next 3-4 days. During that time, John came, and I talked to him about A, traded tobacco with him. For 2 nights he didn't do no work on the trade, and we just went to sleep right after the trough because the master worked him so hard. On the 3rd night after I traded for A, sometime that same night Alice ran. My life is short, but some live long, and the one thing I know, short and long, was it's wrong to run. Not wrong because it's wrong because nobody ever gets away. I've seen 2 try it, both men. One was an old man named Jim who just couldn't make no more, and one night he up and cut. They set out for him the next morning with dogs. Only the master, he don't only go his own self, but took 5 or 6 field hands with him to see, so they could carry what they see back to tell us. The dogs be mean. He feeds them things to make them mean, blood things. Sometimes he'll take them to the field, and should a man or woman work a little behind the others, or behind the best man, who is whipped to speed, why, he sets the dogs on the slow one. He doesn't pull off them right away neither. He lets them go until they taste blood and want more of it. That's mean. They's mean, the dogs. They's big and red, with tight hair and heads like hogs, and mean as Waller his own self. He keeps them in a stone pen in the side of the horse barn, and they slobber and chew at the gate each time we walk by. Dirt mean. Jim, he ran at night, too, and it didn't help. The field hands told us later. He cut out and ran to the river, ran in the water for a goodly distance, and then on top of a fence rail for as long as the fence ran, and then dropped to the ground and just moved. The dogs followed him all the way. The hands, he said, that one dog even got up and ran on top of the top rail of the fence. Only took half a day, and they caught Jim. That's last bit. When he heard the dogs singing him, baying on him, Jim climbed a tree. Problem was, the tree wasn't that high. The tree wasn't higher than he could reach. Nearly and as high as he got, bottom of him hung down where the dogs could reach him. The master set the dogs on him, and they tore and ripped what they could reach until there wasn't any meat on the bottom of Jim's legs or bottom. And the dogs ripped it all off to hang to shreds. And the field hands say that he didn't let go, nor never did. And when he was dead, his hands didn't let go, and his master made the field hands leave him there. Some wanted to take Jim down and bury him, but he made them go and leave him hanging that way, hanging in the tree, or hanging by his hands in the tree, for the birds to eat. Second man was young, name of Pauli. He wasn't a big enough hand to be allowed to be a breeder in the quarters, and so he went on looking. He snuck away and met a girl at the plantation down the road a piece, and they sat down in the moonlight with each other some nights. Polly, he made it back before wake-up time every night, but the last one, he fell asleep in the girl's arms, fell asleep in the moonlight. So they, from the White House, set out with dogs, and Polly didn't run or try to get away. He was on his way home, but they let the dogs have him anyway, tear him up to bleed, but not kill him. Then the master, he tied him down and cut him like he did the cattle so he wouldn't run to the girls no more. But cut went wrong in Polly. He laid all night and bled to death without ever making a sound in the corner of the quarters. So don't nobody run. Besides, I don't think there's a place to run. I heard him talk once of some land north, but it's far away, and it was only talk. But it's far away, and it was only talk. Not something to know, but something to hear, like birds singing, the talk of the land north, or the wind of the trees. But Alice cut and ran that night. She didn't get far, down to the river, and then sideways some. Her back was still ripped and sore, and she must have moved slow. She might have kept moving all the way, or all night, but hadn't gone more than to the other end of the cotton fields, an easy small walk. Then she pulled herself under some brambles, and she was there when they found her. They let the dogs have her. It didn't matter what she'd gone through, or that her thinking wasn't working right. The field hands with him told us he'd smile his big white smile, like the big white house, pale maggot white like his skin, smile, and let the dogs have her. She didn't fight for them or try to get away, and they just tore at her until her whole front was torn and gone, and she was bleeding from the chest. She didn't die. Alice be too tough for her own good. She didn't die, and he made the hands to carry her back and put her in the quarters. Mammy sewed up what she could with canvas thread and greased and patched, and she lived. But like Polly, she didn't make sounds, even while Mammy was pulling at the torn flaps of her skin and sewing them on her chest. Not a sound, just stared at the wall. That night, John called to me as he came past where I was trying to sleep. "Tobacco girl, time for another letter." I had been all day helping Mammy and was tired and sad for Alice, how she be at the other end of the quarters, but I went the same. I still had 2 letters comin' for that first pinch of tobacco. He was sittin' on his heels in the open doorway. I squatted next to him. "What's the next one?" He used a stick with a sharpened end on it and wiggled in the dirt 2 half circles. "B, B," he said. "It be B. That sounds crazy. That's how you say the letter B. It's for bay, or bee, or ba, or boo. That's how a B looks, and how you make the sound." I made it sound in my mouth, whispering. "So where's the bottom of it?" "I swear, you always want to know the bottom to things. Here it is. It sits on itself this way, facing so that the 2 round places push up to the front." Suddenly he's gone. 1 second he's there, and the next he's slammed sideways and gone. "What in the hell are you doing to her?" Mammy was standing there, big, black, and tall in the moonlight. "What you doing to this girl?" She had come from the side and fetched John with such a blow on his head that it knocked him back into the wall and onto his back. He come up quick and didn't cower none. "Nothing, not like you think. I'm teaching her to read." That's what I mean, Mammy said. What in the hell are you doing? Don't you know what they do to her if they find her trying to read? We already got one girl tore to pieces by the whip, and the dogs. We don't need two. I've been quiet all this time watching. Didn't seem so bad what he was doing, teaching me a few letters to know, maybe a word or two, so I said it. Doesn't seem so bad. Bad? Then she hissed like a snake. Child, they'll cut your thumbs off if you learn to read. They'll whip you until your back looks knitted, until it looks like his back. She pointed at John, big old finger. Is that how you got whipped? He shook his head. I ran. And got caught? Not the first time. She waited and I waited. First time I ran, I got clean away. I went north, all the way. I was free. I never heard such a thing. We couldn't even talk about being free. And here, this man said he had been free by running north. I thought, how can that be? You ran and got away? Mammy asked. I did. You ran until you were clean away? I did. And you came back? I did. Why? He sighed. It sounded like his voice, like his laugh, low and way off thunder. It made me think he was going to promise something, the way thunder promises rain. For this. What do you mean, this? To teach reading. It's never quiet in the quarters. During the day the young ones run and scrabble and fight or cry, and there always a gaggle of them. At night everybody be sleepin', but not quiet. Alice, she's quiet, but they's some of them too cry. New workers, who are just old enough to be working in the fields, cry sometimes in their sleep. They hurt, and their hands bleed from the pain and from the new blisters that break and break again. Old workers cry because they're old and getting to the end and have old pain. Some pain, young and old. Some snore. Others just breathe loud. It's a long building and dark, except for the light coming in the door and the small windows, but it's never quiet, not even at night. Now it seemed quiet. Mammy, she looked down at John, didn't say nothing for a long time, just looked. I had to think, to hear the breathing, night sounds. Finally, Mammy talks. Her voice is soft. You came back to teach reading? John nodded. That's half of it. What's the other half? Writing, he smiled. Of course, I wasn't going to get caught. I had mind moving around, teaching a little here, a little there, going to Heidi schools. But I got slow, and they got fast, and some crackers caught me in the woods. They were hunting bear, but the dogs came on me instead, and I took to a tree, and they got me. Another long quiet, way off. Down by the river, I heard a sound of a night bird singing for the day. Soon the sun would come up. Why does it matter? Mammy leaned against the wall. She had one hand on the logs, one on her cheek, tired. Why do that to these young ones, to Sarnie here, if they learn to read and write? It's just grief for them, long-time grief. If they find what they don't have and can't have, it ain't good to know that. It eats at you then, to know it and not have it. They'll have to be able to write, John said, voice pushing. He stood and reached out with one hand, with long fingers, and touched Mammy on the forehead. It was almost like he'd be kissing her with his fingers, soft, touched like black cotton in the dark. They have to read and write. We all have to read and write so we can write about this. What they're doing to us, it has to be written. Mammy, she turned and went back to her mat on the floor, moving quiet, not to look back. She settled next to the young ones, and John turned to me, and he said, Next is C.